I wanted to speak a little bit on this idea of the foundations of our society being removed. To give this a gospel backing, or to root it in the gospel, I guess I'll start by saying that the value of a promised land comes from the consequences of the laws lived. A promised land is defined by laws, the set of laws that are lived by the people there. The United States is a special place, and it was founded on a set of unique principles. But the larger picture of the prosperity of the United States, it's based on more than just the founding principles of the country. It's also based on sort of this amalgam of culture. Just to be precise, people use culture for very, very different reasons than, or used it very different meanings than I'm implying here. So let me just be specific. When I say culture, I mean a set of beliefs that someone lives by. I'll skip over specifically delineating how people use that in a much different way than I'm using it here. So what I'm saying is that the culture of the United States is not explicitly limited to the contents of the Constitution, for example, or even the Bill of Rights, or any of the many letters written by the founders defending or arguing for or against these principles. Historically, there was a tendency to try to maintain that culture. And so when there were deviations from it, whether from an individual or a political party or some new idea had come along that was an alternative to these ideas, there would be attempts made to compare the two, to somehow repel the new idea, if that was what was merited. But somehow along the way, this process became more subversive, and it fell below the radar of almost anyone, really. The only people that knew about it were the ones who were orchestrating it, and the few who were wise enough to see it happening. The situation today is such that these foundations have been removed, and really no one has noticed. Now, I've warned about this on several occasions, and I know that some people no doubt thought that that was an extreme warning, that it was unfounded, and ironically, right, unfounded without foundation. But I think as time goes on, you're seeing more and more examples of this. The most recent, perhaps, is this set of individuals who've decided to remove Donald Trump from the presidential ballot for 2024. And I see in the news that the Secretary of State of Maine has joined the party, along with a few judges from the Colorado Supreme Court and others who are either clamoring for this or who have already done it. Here's the thing. There's two ideas I want to bring up here. One is what happens in a system that's so sensitive to change when just one person does something that's radically different from what's been done in the past. What happens there when the system is complex enough, one person can bring it down completely. And I'm not suggesting that that's what's going to happen because of these ballot removals. I'm just saying, here's the general idea. Here's a specific example. Here's why it's super dangerous. Just one person doing something very different can bring down a system that's complex enough. So there's enormous incentive to make a system robust to that, to keep a system from becoming so complex that it's susceptible to collapse from one person's actions. Obviously, that's something that is important because You can roll the dice and bet on the probability of some crazy person coming along, right? Or some downright evil person. So you do things to prevent that. In this case, tremendous effort was exerted to have a system of checks and balances on power, so that it was very difficult for one person to bring down the system. You'd have to get a concert of people who are all crazy enough to lean in one direction to make it happen. So the other thing, that's the first thing. The other thing to talk about here is what is revealed when you see multiple people doing the same extreme thing while not coming together and orchestrating it. So independent people doing the same crazy thing. If just one person, let's say this Secretary of State of Maine was the first person to remove Trump from the ballot, that would show that we're in problem number one, where a crazy person is doing untold damage to complex system. That would suggest that something has to change there. The fact is that now we have a concert of people that don't know each other who are doing the same thing that's equally crazy. That suggests that there's a systemic problem, right? If there are 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 people who feel this way, there's a lot more than 10 people. And it's not just because they're judges in a state Supreme Court or Secretary of State in a state or whatever, Lieutenant Governor of California. There is an ideology who thinks that this is okay, and there happen to be millions of people who agree. And so because the idea is destructive enough, if the people who hold it are in positions of sufficient power, everything can go haywire. And here's the thing. Crazy people aren't just crazy in one way. So this should give everyone pause. And when I tell you again and again, look, you just don't understand how fragile this all is. This all being, look around you. Do you like climate control? Do you like air conditioning in your house because you live in Texas? Guess what? You have no idea how fragile it is. Do you like having fresh food in your fridge in the dead of winter? Guess what? You have no idea how fragile that is. Do you like the fact that you can hop in your car and drive 200 miles in any direction that you want to go see someone or do something, and you never have to go through a checkpoint? You don't have to bribe anybody. You can just do it. You have no idea how fragile that is. You have no idea how much all of that depends on. How much has to stay exactly the same, or very close to exactly the same, in order for that to go off like it does. And you're surrounded by these things in your life. And if you were to take out all those things that are super sensitive to change, you would be left with almost nothing. So what this is like is a giant pile of extremely dry wood doused in gasoline, and you've got kids lighting matches and throwing it in the direction of the bonfire, and all of them to date have missed the bonfire. And little fires have popped up on the sides because a little tuft of grass caught on fire. If you have here's another image for a complex system. If you have a pile of sand and you're just dropping one grain at a time on it, that pile won't really change until it does. And so it'll just, gently, you can see this in your mind, it'll just gently continue the conical shape, and it'll grow little by little. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a third of it will just drop off the side. That grain that you added was no different than all the others. There was nothing you could do to predict that that would cause half or a third of this pile to landslide off of the pile. And that's what it's like. And so if you're watching that and you know that this is the case, you're going to be thinking in your mind, either this is going to make no noticeable change or it's going to be catastrophic and I have no way of knowing from grain to grain. Although I can say with certainty that most grains will not cause significant change, I can also say with certainty that eventually one will. And that's the situation. Now, another thing I've said is that one of these foundations is the rule of law, and that it's gone. Not it's going, it's gone. There are only two cases where the law is enforced right now. One is in all the ways that do not impede the agenda. The other is when it needs to be enforced to support the agenda. And if you're wondering, the part that's left out here is when the enforcement of the law would not directly support the agenda, when it would contradict it, or prevent it, or impede it. So the people who've been in prison since January 6th without trial, they don't have the rule of law because the agenda needs them in jail without a trial. We don't enforce the Constitution in obvious ways that it's broken on a daily basis, but all of a sudden, when there's some color of law that can be invoked to keep your political opponent off the ballot, all of a sudden, let's start quoting the Constitution, while ignoring other parts of it. Due process. This is how to spot these things from a mile away, is that it's self-contradictory. Okay, so nothing I'm saying here is in favor or against any political party. This, you could call it stupidity or evil, it's a mixture of both, is everywhere. It's everywhere. But I'm bringing this up to show you, to help you understand how awful the situation is. It's already gone. That sand pile's coming down. The question is just which grain's going to do it. And as I've said before, it's not one time that a big chunk of the pile is going to fall off. You're not looking for what's the grain that's going to set it all off. It's a collection of things. This is where we're talking about something much more complicated than a pile of sand. And so it's a steady decline with sudden drops. That's what it's like. It's a ramp with cliffs, plural. So I wanted to bring this to your attention because I know that there are people who read the headlines and they don't necessarily put this together. And it's very important to see. Let me give you this analogy to help bring it home. Murder, it's illegal, right? Let's suppose that I called someone a bad name. I said, "You're a stinky poo-poo head." And someone saw that, and they really don't like me. And they said, "Oh, he just murdered that guy. Let's convict him. Let's put him in jail. Let's charge him with murder." You would hope that the array of people that would have to go along with that somewhere in that chain would be at least one person who said, "Are you stupid? This isn't murder. It's not illegal to call someone a doo-doo head." Right? So even if that person's nuts who accuses you, maybe they call the cops and the cops come and they say, "Look, why'd you call the cops? This isn't murder. This is just someone calling someone a name. You need to go do something else or else I'm going to arrest you for harassment. Maybe the cop also hates you. Maybe you're wearing a blue shirt and they say, you know what? I hate blue shirts. And so even though I can see that this is absurd, I'm going to arrest you under the pretense that you've committed murder because I don't like you and I've got someone willing to accuse you. And then it goes to the next person and the next person. And there's a judge and there's a jury. There's the public. There are all these people who are part of this ecosystem. And if someone doesn't stand up and say, hey, the emperor has no clothes, this is absurd, and actually we should punish all the people making the false accusation. As time goes on, the law of Moses makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? I remember as a young person, one of the strong arguments constantly trotted out against religion was, the law of Moses, the Ten Commandments, and the penalties for the law of Moses, they're so draconian. The laws of Moses are so draconian. This is primitive. Why would anybody believe that? And as time goes on, there's just more and more and more evidence supporting that this is actually not such a bad idea. Right? One of the laws stated that if you accused someone of a crime they did not commit, and that was discovered as part of the trial, you would be you would receive whatever punishment was prescribed for the crime you accused them of. And I know at least one case where it was suggested that become a part of our law in recent times by a politician. And you have to look at that and say, that seems extreme, but we are surrounded by at least some of the effects of not having something like that. So maybe that's not so extreme. So the situation today is that level of absurdity of using laws that weren't written by people trying to describe this situation, totally different situations, are being used really for political purposes, but to support ideologies instead of the truth. They're supporting ideologies contrary to the truth. Not that the ideologies are contrary to the truth, but they're opposing the truth in order to support their ideology. It's like the ends justify the means, but in this case, the means includes total dishonesty and breaking principles left and right. The problem with the principle is that you can't just apply it sometimes. To violate it once is to break it forever. That's what a principle is. It means something we're going to do all the time. So that's not the only meaning, but that's a very important property of principles. That's why they're so powerful. Is you look across a range of general things and you say, is there something we can derive that would apply across the board? And then by applying that principle, what we do is we gain power in the situations where we'd be tempted to do something really stupid and be blind to it. So the principle protects you in your blind spots. So then if you trot out to those blind spots and say, yeah, I know, the principle is important. Freedom of speech is important, but what about the children? It's always the children. What about the children? Consider the children. Or he called me a really bad name, so in this case, I don't think freedom of speech is important. He really doesn't like me, and he wishes I was dead. I think freedom of speech doesn't apply here. Well, is it a principle or isn't it? Principles can't be infringed. They're what we all agree is going to be the highest priority. And if there's a contradiction to that, then the thing that contradicts it is what's going to have to go, and that we all agree on that. They're all broken, folks. They're all broken. And maybe you're not going to get that until you're the one that's directly affected. And if that's the case, your time will come. We're in big trouble. Big trouble. And I don't say this to scare you. I don't say it to cause you to take upon yourself some radical new behavior. I'm saying it to help you prepare by gaining a willingness to do what you would otherwise not do, not in terms of some extreme thing, but the things that are right in front of you. Let me just be super, super, super explicit. When I say things like, hey, there's a much higher cost of sending your kids to public school than you realize. You should think about homeschooling. And you're like, yeah, that's extreme. You're a zealot, whatever. This is what I'm talking about. The things in your own backyard, you could probably do differently, and you probably should do them differently as a result of these big old things that are out in the world that are totally jacked up, that you're vastly misunderstanding the impact of. Just the other day, had a conversation with my kids on this note. One kid in particular who's being really defiant about something, kind of shockingly defiant. And I said, look, how's this going to work if we're in a life or death situation? And I need to be able to count on you to trust that I know what I'm talking about in a thing that's obviously in my wheelhouse as the dad, and you're just going to go off and directly defy what I'm telling you to do. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And we talked through some situations where that would be a life or death for this child or someone else in the family. It's a really big deal. So you should think about, when you see these things in the world, you need to understand the magnitude of what's happening, what it shows you. It's out in the open. If you have 5 people in a nation doing this sort of thing, you can guarantee that there are 5 million people who would be willing to do it. That it's not unique. There's no reason to believe that this is unique to someone in a special political office, a particular political office, which would obviously be a smaller set of people. So what's the, someone who thinks like this, what are they going to do if they're a policeman responding to some call or something? What are they going to do if they're your boss at work or your colleague at work? What are they going to do if they're the people you go to church with? What are they going to do if they're the parents of your child's friend? And on and on and on. And what you see is this matters. And what other things are like this? There's all kinds of other things. So if your kid's public school teacher, for instance, thinks that girls can be boys and boys can be girls, you might say, well, I disagree with that, but that doesn't hurt all the other things that they talk about, and I can just diffuse that bomb at home. I can decode them from that. Okay, do you really think someone could have such an absolutely absurd, extreme view on something so fundamentally obvious, and they have perfectly normal views on everything else? Do you think that that's the case? If someone thinks that they can unilaterally pull a presidential candidate who happens to have majority support right now from a ballot unilaterally based on the contents of an amendment to the Constitution that precludes insurrectionists from holding office, when that person has not been charged, let alone convicted of such, in a court of law, what can they do to you? And I made this ridiculous example of I'm wearing a blue shirt, therefore I'm a murderer kind of thing. Well, it's not absurd, because the same principle that prevents that from happening is the one that's being openly violated. You have to understand the situation. It's bad. It's bad, and it's coming for you. So what to do about that, of course, is a different situation, different question. But I've already said, look to your own backyard. Reconcile your life to the magnitude of what's happening. Not in terms of like, oh my gosh, I better just put on my backpack and run off into the woods or go to Ecuador or something. What I'm saying is, look at your daily life and think about, bring it down to that level, and what are you doing? Are you still living like it's 1996? Because almost all parents are. It's not 1996, people. Get with it and think about what you need to do differently in your daily life. This is a very big deal.